What makes us happy truly? Science's explanation to happiness is an obvious play of different hormones. That means the very concept of happiness is very subjective. And it doesn't get any easier to understand after we realize that there is very thin line between pain and pleasure. A little offside and the deal is on or off. Some people derive pleasure in a very pathological way by inflicting pain and wounds onto others. Bunch of emotional parasites. With the world constantly bombarding us and rewarding for this pathological tendencies of ours, help arrives only after it's been too late. What then should be our response? Welcome all to Time Recaps, where we recap movies and shows in under 15 minutes. Today we're going to recap a science fiction, horror film based on the book by same name, The Invisible Man, starring Elisabeth Moss and Aldous Hodge. I should warn you of spoilers ahead. With that being said, relax and watch the recap. A couple live in a mansion, and while it would look like they're happy, something is really off. The woman wakes up one night and pulls a capsule of medicines from the mattress. It's revealed she has sedated her husband using them. Later she moves towards the closet and shoves a few clothes inside the duffel bag she has and makes sure to turn the camera in the bedroom towards her sleeping husband. She needs to monitor her husband. She passes through the corridors and a room that looks like a lab before making the final exit and coming outside. She obviously wants to make a run for her life, whatever the reason. A dog's bark startles her and she turns back to take off his electric collar. In the process, she sets off the car alarm. Understanding the futility of acting like a wallflower, she makes a run caring very little for what's behind and ahead of her. She sees the light turn on in the bedroom when she's getting down the wall. After having made it outside the mansion, she is seen waiting for someone. Her sister turns up and she gets inside. Suddenly, a hand smashes the car windows and gets the woman by her throat. They however are able to make a run for it, and we can see a bloodied hand picking up the drugs that fell down during the struggle. The woman is revealed to be Cecilia. She's an architect. It's been 2 weeks she ran away from her mansion. She's staying at her friend's house. She is very disturbed, but her friend, Detective James Lanier, is helping her in his own way. One day she musters enough courage to open the door and walk outside. But as soon as she sees a hooded figure, she runs inside the house. We also see her covering her computer camera. She obviously has become paranoid. Sometimes later her sister, Emily, who helped her make the run, visits her. Cecilia is anxious seeing her, thinking her husband, Adrian, might have followed her there. She's asked to relax as she pulls out a phone to show her an article. Here, it is revealed that Adrian used to be an optic engineer and very wealthy businessman who killed himself committing suicide. She sits down and opens about the toxic relationship she was in with her husband all the while until when she made the run with her sister. She says that he would want to control her in all the ways she talked, thought and acted, and it was too much for her to take. He would even abuse her physically. With time, we can see Cecilia healing herself. She is now getting all the letters by her own and is applauded by James and his teen daughter Sid. One day, James gets home with a letter addressed to her specifically. Cecilia along with Emily are at a law firm with Adrian's brother Tom. Tom tells them that Adrian has left Cecilia with $5 million in his will that she can get if she is with no criminal charges and mentally fit. Later that night, Cecilia surprises James with a giant ladder, and Sid with enough money to go to college and pursue a career in fashion designing that she had wanted to ever since. Cecilia is happy but feels eyes on her when the room is apparently empty. This feeling of being watched by someone continues next day too, and Cecilia doesn't feel alone in a creepy way. She goes to check when suddenly the front door opens. She walks outside to check the entrance and gets an uneasy feeling. We can see someone breathing behind her. That night too, when they're sleeping in Sydney's room, someone can be seen pulling blankets off and playing with the lights. Cecilia wakes up in horror only to see Sydney's mannequin. She walks out of the bed to collect the sheets. She can sense another presence in the room sitting on the chair. To calm her intrusive thoughts, she throws the blanket on the chair. Relieved, she takes it to the bed but feels a tug as if someone is standing on it. Paranoia gets better of her and she ends up screaming James for help, waking up Sydney in the process. James calms her and asks her to not let Adrian's memories get better off of her. Next day she goes for an interview. She is a little nervous, but the interviewer is friendly. He wants to see her work. She opens her brief to show him, but all her work is gone away. She faints and falls down. She is with James in a hospital and doctor takes her samples. She receives a call that evening from the doctor. The doctor says high levels of diazepam were found in her system. In her bathroom, she finds the same bottle of bloody diazepam with which she drugged Adrian during her escape. Next day they're in Tom's office and Cecilia demands an explanation for the blood-stained bottle. When Tom displays his ignorance, Cecilia proposes that Aldrin is in fact very alive and probably found a way to go incognito. She also accuses Tom of knowing the specifics and yet playing it all dumb. Tom rubbishes her accusations and shows her file that prove Adrian is in fact dead and she's acting delusional. The following evening, Cecilia is visiting Emily. Emily pulls a long face seeing her. Cecilia asks what's wrong. Emily replies that she got her emails and found them very rude and disrespectful. Cecilia tries convincing Emily that was not her and that Adrian must be still alive. Emily closes door on her and she returns to James's house. She checks her mails and finds the one sent to Emily from her account. She is crying on the floor. Sid comes in and comforts her. They decide to go outside when suddenly Sid feels something hit her. She calls James for help and Cecilia tries to explain how it wasn't her but Adrian. James asks her to gather herself and leaves for outside with Sid giving Cecilia some space. Cecilia is seen to be losing her mind calling for Adrian to leave her alone as if he's there. She then throws coffee on the ground and dares Adrian to come get her. As she is talking to him she gets an idea to ring on his phone. She can hear the phone buzzing somewhere in the attic. She climbs up there and finds his phone, keys, knife and her missing design work. She gets distracted by a noise and goes back to check. She pours a bucket of white paint that reveal a creepy manly figure. She climbs down and goes to kitchen where a tap can be heard running. There also is white paint on the sink. Suddenly an invisible hand grabs her and lifts her in the air. She fights and the invisible figure can be seen trying to strangulate her. She is able to throw the figure off and runs outside of the house. She calls for an Uber and goes back to the mansion. She asks the driver to wait for her and goes inside. Zeus the dog comes greet her and they go to the basement where the lab is. She runs her fingers on the gadget stuck on the wall and is able to break into it that reveals an invisible suit. It's obviously a spare one. She shoves it in her bag and is about to exit when suddenly Zeus starts to bark at something. She hides in the closet and is praying hard to not get seen. The figure can be seen coming close but fails to see her. She is able to escape with the dog's help. Back in the taxi, she calls Emily saying she has a solid evidence that points to Adrian being alive and wants to meet her in a restaurant. Emily agrees. That evening, Cecilia is feeling uneasy at the sight of the empty chair in front of her. She feels alright after Emily comes and occupies the seat. They start talking and Cecilia is about to spill the beans when they get distracted by a floating knife that slits open Emily's throat and flies to her hand. The woman sitting on the adjacent table sees this and screams on top of her lungs, drawing all people away from Cecilia. The authorities come and pin her down while she is screaming of innocence. She is taken to a mental facility and injected with sedative. She keeps repeating it's Adrian who killed her sister and not her. Footsteps can be heard advancing towards her and whisper the word surprise. The next day James and his fellow detective are interrogating Cecilia. Cecilia claims she has evidence that prove of Adrian's existence but can't say anything about it as he might be in a corner listening. While in the hospital, she learns about her pregnancy. Tom exercises the leverage saying that since she has criminal charges against her and perceived to be mentally unstable, she can't receive the money Adrian has left for her in the will. He offers to get her charges dropped if she agrees to return to Adrian and raise the child, implying that Tom helped stage his brother's suicide. He reveals Adrian tampered with her birth control to impregnate her. Cecilia refuses the offer and steals a fountain pen from him. That night after the warden has done checking her room, she steps into the shower and slits her veins open using the fountain pen she grabbed earlier to lure out Adrian. An invisible hand grasps her and she fights him to nail him down and stabs him multiple times. The warden, seeing her on ground, enters and asks her to go back to bed. Suddenly a creepy figure becomes apparent and stuns the warden using his own gun. Cecilia is able to make a run from her cell only to be dragged back by two officers. A fight ensues and the figure is able to take them all out. Meanwhile, Cecilia comes out of the facility with a gun in her hand and wants nothing more but to kill the invisible figure. She moves from one vehicle to another before she spots one that has the trunk open. She gets confronted suddenly by the figure who threatens to kill people she cares about if she tries again to harm the baby or terminate it. The figure is seen leaving and Cecilia follows him. She tries to stop him by shooting in his direction but causes a car crash. She steals that car and calls James asking to protect Sydney from the upcoming danger. Next scene, Sid and her father is seen to be under attack by the invisible force. Sid is able to momentarily distract when suddenly Cecilia busts in and sprays him the extinguisher before shooting him with a gun. The figure is revealed to be Tom. Meanwhile, in another corner, a special police force barges inside the mansion upon receiving complaints from residents around. They rescue Adrian, who is seen to be held hostage. He accuses his brother of keeping him in the basement. Cecilia thinks it's still Adrian who used Tom to make her look crazy. She plans to get him to admit on record and agrees to meet him the following night. Adrian is waiting for her by the door. After exchanging pleasantries, they sit down for dinner. Cecilia tries to get him to admit. But Adrian just keeps denying. Cecilia excuses herself for a moment to use washroom. Adrian is waiting for her and starts growing restless all of a sudden. He slits his own throat and collapses on the ground. Cecilia comes back and finds Adrian dying. She rushes to him and dials 911 for emergency. After having moved away from the blind spot of the camera, she sits content in a corner watching him die. She utters the words, "surprise," before Adrian closes his eyes. She comes out and James confronts her. He sees the suit in the duffel bag of hers and asks if at all she really intended to get him on record. Cecilia denies and James nods, understanding that maybe the path she opted wasn't right. But she did do the right thing. Cecilia walks outside and inhales deeply before exhaling all the worries and air out for good. The air never was so fresh before to her. While the movie is full of odd pearls, they didn't really make efforts to hide them. Obsession can be debated to be of healthy and pathological kind, alright. It however is totally wrong to impose one's will onto others. The harm isn't just done to the other person, but to the self too. This was apparent with the ultimate death of Adrian. The world is round for a reason is all I'm saying. What goes around, comes around. Let me know what you found interesting about the movie in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. See you in next one.